The other day, I saw this tweet from a fellow named Isolated Atheist. He says, I don't understand how people can be fans of WWE while knowing that it's fake. I don't think I'll ever be able to understand this. So he's referring here to World Wrestling Entertainment, or what I called growing up WWF, World Wrestling Federation. I kind of understand where he's coming from, because back in the early mid 1980s, I thought it was all quote unquote real as well. I thought that Hulk Hogan was really a good guy, and the Iron Sheik, when he beat him for the title, I think in 1984, that he was the bad guy. I thought when WrestleMania 1 with Mr. T and Hulk Hogan in a tag team was one of the highlights of my childhood. And I was somewhat disillusioned in the late 1980s when I learned that wrestling, professional wrestling, was in fact staged, that it was planned, that the matches were planned, that the idea of the good guys and the bad guys was fabricated for the sake of telling the story and selling the product. So the Iron Sheik wasn't actually an Iron Sheik. He was a guy that was adopting this persona in order to make it in professional wrestling. And that, like with the Isolated Atheist, I was kind of became disenfranchised with professional wrestling for a while. But then I offered this response to the Isolated Atheist because my attitude began to change. I replied and I said, fake is a misnomer. Professional wrestling is performance drama, not sport. And rest assured, the athleticism is real. So 2 things here. Don't judge professional wrestling because it's not amateur wrestling, because it's not a conventional sport. Professional wrestling is, in a sense, more like a soap opera, where there's storylines and they are planned in advance. But that doesn't mean you reject it as a sport, because it's not a sport, right? It's entertainment, hence World Wrestling Entertainment. The other part here I said is the athleticism is still real. I mean, in the same way that you can say figure skating, well, is that a sport or not? I don't know, who cares? However you want to define sport, the point is that there's still enormous athleticism involved in figure skating. And rest assured, there is enormous athleticism involved in wrestling as well. Now, just to drive the point home, I want to show you a clip from a biography on WWE, on WWE on the topic, which was from the Arts and Entertainment channel, A&E, and it's talking about this iconic battle, this match between Ricky Steamboat and Randy Macho Man Savage at WrestleMania 3. This is considered one of the heights, one of the best matches of quote unquote fake wrestling. I'll just play a little clip.
I could count them on one hand, and that was one of them. I honestly don't think that if he wasn't so stiff, I don't think it would come on. And I give that all to me. It was sold out for the wrestlers in the back. There was nobody that didn't watch that match. We knew before it happened, it's like, this is going to be a match that raises the bar. Just speechless. I was in awe of how good it was. All those guys are coming up, just congratulating, shaking their hands.
I'm just going to pause it, stop it there. But I think that you get a sense for the kind of athleticism that was involved in this. The other thing that's really interesting, you just caught a glimpse of it there, but there was a yellow pad of paper, and it was all the stages of the match worked out. So Randy and Ricky together, they choreographed the entire fight down, pretty much almost down to the second, planning, okay, you do this and then I'll do this. And when I saw that, that really drove home to me in a new sense the precise nature of how impressive this performance is. Now, what that means for me is that I now look with an even deeper appreciation for World Wrestling Federation or World Wrestling Entertainment, whatever you want to call it, for that kind of professional wrestling as performance, because I now see the greater depth of planning and artistry and creativity and athleticism that goes into staging these kinds of events. I don't judge them on the fact that they are not quote unquote real in the sense that amateur professional or amateur wrestling is real or other sport is real. Rather, it's real on its own terms, right? It's performance. All of this now brings me back to the Bible, because there's a really interesting analogy here with the Bible. Growing up in a conservative Protestant evangelical tradition, we were taught, for example, that all the narratives of the Bible, you interpret them literally. And so if there was not a literal Garden of Eden in Genesis 2, and if Eve was not literally created out of the side, the rib of the man, Adam, and if there was not this literal snake who talked to them, and then there's this literal fall, and they were literally kicked out of the garden, if you don't all have that, well, then it's fake, right? And then it's of no value. But just as I came to recognize that wrestling, professional wrestling, is profoundly important and significant on its own terms, so I came to recognize that when I understood that how deeply flawed this literalist hermeneutic was in approaching particular passages of scripture, such as the cosmogonic creation narratives, the etiologies that you find in Genesis 1-3 or Genesis 1-11, when I came to recognize that, then I could now understand and appreciate the profundity of those literary texts on their own terms, much as I came to appreciate professional wrestling on its own term. This brings me back to the isolated atheist. I don't know who this individual is, but I think many people, you have to undergo that same process. As you come to appreciate how wrestling is significant and important on its own terms, so a biblical narrative is not significant or of value or truth conducive only if it corresponds to some literal past historical event. You have to understand the genre of literature, the hermeneutical application, the theological significance. And it may be that that text is operating in ways that you never anticipated, but which are nonetheless profound and significant, even though they are not literally true.